You lose power every time you explain yourself. The moment you try to justify what you said, what you did, or who you are, you hand over your authority to the perception of others. It sounds harmless, an attempt to be understood, to clarify, to make peace, but deep down it is an invisible confession that their understanding of you matters more than your own. And that is the beginning of weakness. The powerful never rush to explain. They let others wonder, speculate, and even misjudge, because they know something most people never learn, that silence convinces better than words ever could. Silence creates tension, and tension is influence. The one who speaks is exposed. The one who stays silent becomes a mirror. In that mirror, others project their own fears, fantasies, and insecurities, and in doing so, they reveal more about themselves than about you. When you stop explaining, you force others to think. You make them fill the gaps, question their assumptions, and reconsider your value. The mind hates uncertainty, and when you remain silent, you become the source of that uncertainty. They can't predict you, and therefore they can't control you. In every power dynamic, from love to business to friendship, the most dominant energy belongs to the one who appears self-contained. The person who does not need to explain, defend, or persuade radiates something deeper than confidence. It's composure, the quiet strength that says, "I know what I did. I know who I am. You can believe what you want." That kind of silence unnerves people because it cannot be argued with. Explanation invites debate. Silence closes the door. People are addicted to reaction. They poke, provoke, and question because they need emotional confirmation that they still matter. When you respond with silence, you deny them that validation. They will push harder. They will accuse you of arrogance, indifference, or manipulation. But beneath that irritation lies fascination. Your silence becomes a void that their mind tries to fill, and that's where influence begins, not in the noise you make, but in the space you leave. Consider how easily explanation becomes emotional exposure. You don't just defend your actions. You start revealing your intentions, your feelings, your insecurities. Every sentence you add is another piece of yourself surrendered. It's like peeling your own armor off while hoping the other person won't strike. But they always do, because human nature can't resist testing weakness once it's seen. The powerful know this. They know that mystery protects more than honesty ever will. It's not about being deceitful. It's about being selective. Every explanation is an open door, and every open door invites intrusion. Silence, on the other hand, is a fortress. It doesn't need guards because no one knows where the entrance is. When you stop explaining, you stop bleeding energy. You conserve your words for when they actually change something, not when they merely soothe someone's ego. Most people speak to defend their image, not their truth. They fear being misunderstood more than they fear being disrespected, but the truth is misunderstanding can work in your favor if you let it. Let them guess, let them doubt. Let them think you're cold, distant, or unpredictable. In the end, silence always outlasts noise. Words decay. Silence lingers. And the longer it lingers, the more powerful it becomes. That is why silence terrifies the weak, because it forces them to face themselves. When you refuse to explain, you make others question why they need your validation so much. They start replaying conversations, analyzing your tone, reinterpreting your gestures. You occupy their mental space without doing anything. That's psychological gravity, the quiet pull of someone who knows their value. But here's the deeper truth. The need to explain comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, rejected, or dismissed. And that fear is the chain that binds most people to mediocrity. The powerful, the truly self-assured, accept that misunderstanding is the tax of individuality. They know that those who truly matter will understand without needing proof. And those who don't will twist your words regardless of what you say. So why explain? Every explanation is an apology disguised as reasoning. It says, "Please see me the way I want to be seen." But power doesn't beg for perspective. It shapes it. The more you explain, the smaller you appear, because explanation is an admission of dependence on their opinion. When you stop explaining, you stop needing permission to exist as you are. You take your power back from the public court of perception and return it to where it belongs, your own mind. The discipline of silence is not about coldness. It's about control. You don't speak because you choose not to. not because you can't. That distinction creates dominance. People respect restraint more than rhetoric. In a world obsessed with opinions, the one who withholds his voice becomes sacred. His words, when finally spoken, carry weight, because silence has made them rare. Think about the figures who command presence without speaking, the leader who enters the room and doesn't rush to greet, the man or woman who simply observes, listening with a half smile, the one who walks away without responding to provocation. These people exude power not because of what they say, but because of what they withhold. The silence around them becomes an aura. Others sense it, respect it, sometimes fear it, because it represents something they lack: self-possession. The inability to explain is often perceived as arrogance by those who depend on validation. But the truth is simpler. When you no longer crave to be understood, you have transcended the need for approval. And that's when you start to see who actually values you for your essence, not for your compliance. The people who truly see you won't demand explanations. They'll recognize the pattern of your character over time. The rest are just spectators, addicted to the illusion of access. Silence denies them that addiction. It starves their curiosity. And when curiosity meets hunger, it turns into obsession. The more they don't know, the more they want to know. That is attraction in its purest form, not forced, not begged, but earned through absence. To stop explaining is to start communicating on a different frequency. Words appeal to logic. Silence speaks to the subconscious. When you stop explaining, you bypass their intellect and go straight into their imagination. They begin to interpret your silence in ways that reveal their own desires and fears. That's why the powerful often appear calm, detached, or even mysterious, because they let silence do the work of persuasion. They understand that influence isn't about saying more. It's about saying less and meaning more. Every time you resist the urge to explain, you build internal strength. You teach yourself that peace doesn't depend on being understood. You free yourself from the exhausting need to be right in the eyes of others. You become untouchable, not because you have no emotions, but because your emotions are no longer public property. And in that quiet confidence, you find a truth that very few ever reach. That silence isn't the absence of communication, it's the highest form of it. It says, "I am enough as I am. I do not owe clarity to anyone who hasn't earned it." That sentence, even unspoken, is power in its purest form. There is a certain kind of strength that only those who have learned the value of silence can understand. A strength that doesn't come from dominating conversations, but from mastering the urge to justify. The world rewards those who speak the loudest, but it quietly bows to those who speak the least. To stop explaining is to begin governing your presence. Every unnecessary explanation is a seed of doubt you plant in the minds of others. It tells them you are unsure, that you are still seeking approval. The powerful, on the other hand, let their actions and their demeanor form their defense. They know that no amount of words can repair a perception once weakness has been sensed. Power is not about convincing others, it is about not needing to. Silence is the invisible armor of those who understand human psychology. People are not persuaded by logic, they are persuaded by emotion, and nothing stirs emotion like uncertainty. When you explain yourself too much, you kill that uncertainty. You give others the illusion of understanding you, and with it the illusion of control. But when you remain silent, they must interpret your intentions, and in doing so they expose theirs. They reveal what they fear, what they desire, what they expect of you. This is why silence is never passive. It is active control, disguised as restraint. In every confrontation, in every negotiation, in every relationship, the one who can stay quiet longest holds the upper hand. They listen, observe, and measure. They know that people talk themselves into exposure, into weakness, into confession. The silent one does not need to trap anyone. They let others trap themselves. But to master silence, you must first conquer the emotional need to be understood. That's where most people fail. They confuse understanding with acceptance, and when they feel misunderstood, they panic. They rush to fix the narrative, to defend themselves, to clarify. But the truth is, the moment you do that, you become reactive, and the reactive person always loses the psychological advantage. The one who remains composed, who lets the misunderstanding breathe without anxiety, becomes unshakable. The world starts to read that composure as power. Silence in the face of accusation, mockery, or doubt is not submission, it's strategy. It forces others to question their assumptions and reveals their discomfort with ambiguity, and that discomfort will always make them talk more, reveal more, and eventually regret underestimating you. Silence magnifies presence. It makes people feel your absence even when you're in the same room. You don't have to announce your worth. You radiate it through your control. When you stop explaining, you stop fighting for space in people's minds. They start giving it to you. The irony is that those who explain the most are often the least understood. Their words blur the essence of who they are because they speak from anxiety, not authority. The powerful few speak rarely, and when they do, they are believed, not because their words are perfect, but because their silence before them was unbreakable. To stop explaining is also to stop begging for empathy. You don't need people to understand your intentions when your path is guided by conviction. Those who truly know you will read the truth in your silence. Those who don't never would have believed you anyway. This realization frees you from the emotional slavery of needing validation. You begin to see that explanation is not a bridge, it's a leash. It ties your peace to their perception. And once you cut it, you begin to move differently. Your decisions become cleaner. Your energy becomes precise. You stop reacting to misunderstandings and start focusing on outcomes. The world starts to notice this shift. People sense that your silence is not emptiness, it's concentration. They start choosing their words more carefully around you because they feel your restraint. And restraint is magnetic. It signals discipline, control, and mystery. These are the qualities that attract both respect and fear. The powerful use silence the way artists use negative space, not to create absence, but to emphasize what truly matters. They let silence outline their boundaries, their values, their patience. In a world addicted to noise, silence becomes luxury. It's rare, it's valuable, and it commands attention. Every moment you resist explaining, you build psychological capital. You become unpredictable. And unpredictability is one of the highest forms of leverage in human interaction. People cannot manipulate what they cannot read. They cannot prepare for what they cannot predict. Your silence turns into a fog that blinds those who seek to control you. But the discipline to remain silent comes at a cost, the cost of ego. Your ego will scream for defense when someone misunderstands you. It will crave to prove your innocence, your intentions, your intelligence. That's when you must remind yourself that true intelligence is not proven through debate, but through detachment. You don't need to correct every false perception. Let the truth reveal itself over time. It always does. The truth doesn't need your voice, it needs your patience. When you understand this, you will stop explaining because you'll realize that silence is not losing the argument. It's refusing to participate in one you've already won. Your calm will unsettle people because it exposes how loud and fragile theirs is. They'll call your silence arrogance because that's easier than admitting that your peace intimidates them. But arrogance is loud. Power is quiet. The difference lies in motive. Arrogance seeks attention. Power withdraws it. When you stop explaining, your silence stops being defensive and starts becoming offensive. It shifts from retreat to dominance. You no longer speak to justify your decisions. You let the results of those decisions speak for you. You no longer react to assumptions. You let the weight of your composure challenge them. This is what it means to command respect without effort. To make silence your voice is to move from proving to being. You no longer need to be seen. Your energy is felt. That is the deepest form of persuasion, not to convince people with words, but to make them feel your certainty in your stillness. And that certainty will begin to echo in every room you walk into. Those who once doubted you will feel it before they understand it. They will sense the quiet force of someone who no longer needs to explain, who no longer seeks to be seen, because he has already seen through everything. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you cross an invisible threshold, from the world of noise into the realm of power. It feels unnatural at first, because you've been conditioned to defend yourself since childhood, to explain, to clarify, to prove that your intentions were good, your choices reasonable, your feelings valid. You were taught that communication solves misunderstanding, but no one told you that too much communication creates dependence. The need to be understood becomes a quiet addiction, one that weakens your mind and exposes your soul. You start chasing approval through explanations, thinking you are being transparent, when in truth you are being stripped of mystery, and mystery is the foundation of power. To stop explaining is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of inner sovereignty. It means that your emotions no longer negotiate with external validation. You don't speak to be seen, you act because you know. And that knowing, that calm conviction, terrifies people who rely on words to prove their worth. When you stay silent, they project their insecurities onto your quietness. They assume arrogance, guilt, pride, coldness, anything but peace. Because peace is something they cannot recognize in themselves. But your silence does not need to defend itself. The need to explain is the need to control perception, and control is the illusion that consumes the insecure. When you no longer try to control what others think, you free yourself from the emotional economy that runs the world, the constant trading of words for reassurance. Silence ends that trade. It makes you economically powerful in the currency of attention. The less you spend, the more you possess. Each explanation you withhold adds weight to your presence. People start to feel that every word you choose to speak must matter, because you have already proven you can stay silent. The scarcity of your expression becomes its own kind of authority. And yet, silence is not just about absence of sound, it's about mastery of timing. The powerful know when to speak and when not to. They understand that silence can be louder than justification, that withholding truth can reveal more than explanation ever could. Because silence forces others to engage with your mystery, to fill in the gaps with their imagination. And imagination is far more persuasive than logic. When people imagine, they become emotionally invested in their own conclusions. You don't need to convince them. They convince themselves. That is why silence is one of the most advanced tools of psychological influence. It allows others to build their own story around you, and in doing so, they bind themselves to their own perception of your value. You become the mirror of their mind, reflecting what they wish you to be, or what they fear you are. Either way, you win, because power is not about controlling people directly. It's about guiding their imagination. The loud explainers of the world never grasp this. They believe they can manage perception through constant justification, but every word dilutes their aura. They might be right, but they sound defensive. They might be honest, but they appear desperate. The moment you start explaining, you step off the throne and stand among the crowd. You become another voice begging to be heard. But silence. Silence keeps you above it all. It's the language of those who know that time will prove them right. And those who don't need to prove themselves now are the ones who last longest. You don't explain because you trust your own gravity. And gravity does not need to announce itself. It is felt, not described. People who master silence are often misunderstood at first. The world calls them cold or distant, but what they really are is self-contained. Their energy doesn't leak through words. They move through the noise with a kind of invisible grace. When others rush to justify, they wait. When others panic to clarify, they observe. When others try to convince, they let silence build pressure until the other side reveals itself. Silence, when used with discipline, turns discomfort into a weapon. The longer you hold it, the more others feel compelled to fill it. And the moment they do, they expose something. Their intentions, their insecurities, their weakness. This is why interrogators, negotiators, and leaders alike understand the strategic weight of silence. But in personal life, few ever learn it. They rush to explain when accused, to justify when doubted, to beg when misunderstood. Yet every time they do, they lose a layer of respect. Respect is born from restraint. The one who doesn't rush to explain implies that they don't need to. That quiet implication is power. It says, I know what I did. I don't owe you my peace. And that unsettles anyone who thrives on emotional control. They may try to provoke you further, demand explanations, or create chaos to shake your calm. But the one who stays silent through storms becomes something dangerous, unpredictable. Unpredictability is fear in disguise. People cannot manage what they cannot read, and silence erases your emotional map. They can't tell if you're hurt, if you're planning, if you're indifferent. And that confusion breeds respect, sometimes even submission. The truth is that silence speaks to something primal. In the presence of true quiet, people sense authority. They may not understand why, but they feel it, because silence is ancient. It carries the weight of control, discipline, and awareness. The most powerful individuals in history, from philosophers to conquerors, have known this. They understood that silence is a tool not only for dominance, but for clarity. The more you refrain from explaining, the more you hear what others are truly saying. You begin to see the patterns in how people seek validation, how they react to being ignored, how quickly they reveal themselves when faced with ambiguity. Silence becomes your microscope. It allows you to observe without participating, to learn without losing energy. Every time you resist the temptation to explain, you strengthen this muscle. You realize how rarely people actually listen, not just to you, but to themselves. They speak to escape discomfort, not to express truth. And when you stay silent, that discomfort bounces back to them like an echo in an empty room. They hear themselves more clearly than ever before, and that experience changes them. That is why silence, though soft, can reshape relationships, careers, and destinies. It redefines power as something internal, not imposed. When you stop explaining, you're no longer playing defense in the game of perception. You become the field itself, unmovable, self-sufficient, complete. And the world eventually adjusts to your silence because it must. That's the final irony. What begins as misunderstanding often ends as authority. People will talk about you, interpret you, resist you. But over time, they will align with your stillness. Because silence, when consistent, becomes identity. And identity, once solidified, cannot be debated. The art of silence begins the moment you realize that words rarely change minds. They only reveal dependence. Most people speak not to communicate truth, but to control how they are perceived. They believe that if they explain enough, justify enough, or prove enough, they will finally be seen the way they want to be seen. But the truth is merciless. The more you explain, the more others define you. Explanation gives them a map to your thoughts, a manual to your emotions. Once people know how you think, they know how to reach you and how to hurt you. That is why the masters of power always speak less than necessary. They know that silence is not emptiness, it is protection. To stay silent is to preserve mystery, and mystery is what keeps your energy sacred. The human mind craves clarity, but it also worships what it cannot fully grasp. When you stop explaining, you become that mystery, the quiet presence that lingers long after the conversation ends. People talk about you, speculate about your motives, and project their fantasies into the void you create. You become not just a person, but a psychological force. And that is where real influence begins. To explain is to satisfy curiosity. To stay silent is to feed it. And curiosity, once awakened, binds people to you far longer than persuasion ever could. You must understand that explanation is a form of emotional leakage. It reveals your priorities, your fears, your attachments. When you rush to justify yourself, you are saying, without words, I care too much about your approval. But silence says something entirely different. I value my peace more than your perception. That message cuts deeper than any argument. It unsettles people because they can't control it. Most interactions are power exchanges disguised as communication. One person seeks to dominate through words, the other maintains control through composure. The one who talks most usually loses the most. It is the same principle seen in chess. The first to move reveals strategy. When you explain, you reveal your moves before they're necessary. The silent player, on the other hand, forces others to act prematurely, and when they do, they expose their entire hand. You win not by speaking, but by observing. The world underestimates how much control lies in observation. To watch without reacting, to listen without rushing, to let others show themselves. This is how you build real understanding. Words cloud judgment. Silence clarifies it. The quiet mind sees the truth because it does not need to prove it. Silence sharpens perception, and perception is power. It allows you to move through life not as a participant in every drama, but as an architect of outcomes. You learn that not every misunderstanding deserves correction, not every accusation deserves defense, and not every curiosity deserves satisfaction. The more you explain, the smaller your world becomes, because you live in reaction to the opinions of others. But when you choose silence, your world expands. You gain time, energy, and perspective. You begin to act from purpose, not pressure. The people who misunderstand you will either fade away or eventually understand on their own. Either outcome benefits you. Power lies in patience. It takes discipline to stay silent while being misjudged, but that discipline transforms you. Every time you resist explaining, you are teaching your ego humility and your mind dominance. You are training yourself to detach your peace from external chaos. That detachment is what makes your presence magnetic. Others will notice it even if they can't name it. They'll sense that your silence carries more meaning than their explanations. They'll begin to choose their words carefully around you, afraid to reveal too much. They'll second-guess themselves after every interaction, and without realizing it, they will orbit around your quietness. That is the gravitational field of silence. It pulls without force. But make no mistake, silence is not the same as avoidance. Avoidance hides from truth. Silence owns it. You are not running from confrontation, you are mastering it. You are showing that you can hold emotional weight without collapsing under it. People mistake silence for weakness because they cannot imagine strength that doesn't shout. Yet the most unshakable form of strength is restraint, the ability to remain unmoved while the world tries to provoke you. When you stop explaining, you begin to embody that restraint. You begin to communicate something beyond words, emotional control. Emotional control is the rarest currency in human interaction. It cannot be faked for long, and those who truly possess it never explain it. They simply radiate it. Every situation you encounter will test your mastery. Someone will misinterpret your intentions. Another will demand answers you don't owe. Some will try to guilt you into speaking, using emotional pressure disguised as concern. They'll say, "I just want to understand," when what they truly want is power. Learn to recognize this manipulation. Explanation often becomes the gateway through which others re-enter your mind. Once inside, they rearrange your piece, redefine your story, and leave you doubting yourself. The antidote is simple but demanding. Hold your silence. Let discomfort speak for you. Let absence be your message. There will be moments when your silence costs you relationships, opportunities, perhaps even reputation. But what it gives you in return is something those things can never replace: inner stability. You learn that peace built on explanation is fragile, but peace built on silence is indestructible. It is the kind of peace that follows you everywhere because it lives within you. And when people finally realize that your silence was not weakness but choice, their respect will grow in proportion to the time they misunderstood you. The longer you remain silent, the more they will listen when you finally decide to speak. Because true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. It speaks once, and the echo lasts for years. When you stop explaining, you step outside the world of emotional transactions and into the world of quiet dominance. You no longer chase clarity, you become clarity. You no longer beg to be seen, you become unforgettable. That is the paradox of silence. What begins as emptiness ends as authority. And those who once demanded explanations will eventually find themselves explaining to you. There comes a moment when you finally understand that silence is not just a reaction, it is a declaration. It declares that your peace is no longer for negotiation, that your truth no longer seeks an audience, that your value no longer needs confirmation. The world teaches you to speak, to argue, to defend, as if silence were the language of weakness. But the longer you live, the more you realize that the loudest people often carry the least certainty. Those who truly know do not rush to prove. They wait, they watch, and they let truth reveal itself with time. Because time, not words, is the ultimate witness. Every explanation is an attempt to speed up what silence can do effortlessly, reveal character. When you stop explaining, you are no longer trapped in the cycle of justification that consumes so many. You stop giving others the power to define whether your choices were right or wrong. You begin to exist beyond their comprehension. That's what unnerves people. When they can no longer read you, they can no longer own you. Silence is ownership of self, complete, sovereign, unbending. And in that state, You learn a secret most never grasp. You cannot lose what you never defend. When you stop explaining, you stop losing pieces of yourself in the process of being understood. You stop bleeding energy into conversations that don't deserve your clarity. You stop letting other people's confusion become your concern. That is the highest form of discipline, to protect your inner world by refusing to translate it for those who are not ready to understand it. There is a kind of elegance in that restraint, an invisible confidence that says, I don't need to prove my integrity, my silence already has. You'll notice that once you master this, interactions begin to change. People who once demanded explanations start adjusting their tone. They begin to measure their words, aware that your silence is not submission, but control. Some will grow distant, others will grow intrigued. Both outcomes are victories. The ones who leave make space for peace. The ones who stay learn to respect your boundaries. Silence filters the world for you. It removes noise, drama, and the endless tug-of-war for validation. You stop living reactively and start moving strategically. You speak only when your words have weight, not when they are demanded. And when you finally speak, the world listens. Not because you ask it to, but because it has learned that your silence is never empty. The human mind remembers silence more than speech. Noise is everywhere, quiet is rare, and what is rare becomes sacred. Your silence turns into a kind of aura, a subtle form of communication that others feel before they understand. It says, I am not here to be liked, I am here to be. That is the difference between approval and authority. Approval asks to be accepted. Authority commands respect through presence. And presence cannot exist without silence. When you stop explaining, you cultivate stillness. That stillness is not apathy, it is strength in suspension. You are no longer moved by opinion because your foundation is internal, not external. You can walk away from misunderstanding without the impulse to fix it, because you finally see the truth. The people who need explanations from you were never listening to understand, they were listening to control. Once you see that, the game ends. You stop arguing with noise and start aligning with purpose. Your silence becomes your strategy, and your composure becomes your weapon. Others will call you distant, mysterious, even intimidating, but that's only because they are used to noise as a measure of worth. They cannot comprehend a person who doesn't fight to be heard. Yet deep down, they envy it. They envy your ability to walk away without a word, to let things end without closure, to stand accused without defense, because they can feel the strength in it, the quiet defiance of someone who no longer chases understanding. You have to reach a certain depth within yourself to achieve this, a level where you no longer need to prove goodness, intelligence, or value, where your peace becomes more important than your image, where you realize that the ones who truly matter don't need explanations, and the ones who demand them don't deserve them. That clarity is what transforms silence from restraint into power. The more you practice it, the more you'll see how easily words trap people. They talk themselves into guilt, into weakness, into obligation. But you stay still, and in that stillness, the truth rearranges itself in your favor. Time always sides with the silent, because silence doesn't decay, it echoes. It follows people long after the moment has passed. They replay your stillness in their minds, wondering what it meant, what you thought, what you felt. And in that wondering, they stay connected to your energy, even in your absence. That is the quiet pull of real power. You don't chase, you don't explain. You allow presence to speak the language words never could. The fewer explanations you give, the clearer your essence becomes. The quieter you become, the louder your influence grows. And one day you'll look back and realize that every moment you chose silence was not a moment of weakness, but of creation. You were building your authority, your aura, your peace. You were turning chaos into control. You were letting the world learn what you already knew, that silence doesn't hide the truth. It protects it. And those who have the patience to remain silent long enough always win the game of perception, because they no longer play it. They simply exist above it. Silence, at its highest form, is not resistance. It is transcendence. It is the art of saying everything without a single word. It's the moment when you realize that the people meant to understand you will do so in your quiet, and the rest will drown in their own noise. And as you stand there, calm, unbothered, unreadable, you finally understand the ultimate truth. Silence isn't the absence of power, it's the proof of it. Subscribe, because real power doesn't shout, it whispers.